Welcome to the Be a Better You podcast, the podcast for women who survived the relationship and are ready to heal from it. I'm your host, Allison K. Dagny. After surviving 20 years of emotional abuse, I found the tools to truly heal, not just cope. Now, every week, I share those same tools with you so you can stop second-guessing yourself, break free from the past, and reclaim your life. Because this is where coping ends and real healing begins. Now let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Be a Better You podcast. I am your host and subconscious reprogramming expert and emotional abuse recovery mentor, Allison K. Dagny. Today I want to start with a question. Have you ever solved a problem, but then later realized it actually wasn't the real problem? Like, maybe you were trying to stop thinking about something, or maybe you were trying to be more confident, or maybe you were trying to stop caring what people thought about you. But what if those aren't actually the problems that you were needing to solve, but symptoms of something else? Because here's something that I've learned in my own healing and in working with women every single week. The biggest thing keeping us stuck usually isn't something that we're ignoring. It's something that we have never questioned. So today on the podcast, I'm going to be talking about survivor blind spots. And this isn't because you're ignoring something. This isn't because you're healing wrong or anything like that. Everyone has blind spots, and I think it's important for us to look at them. This is going to help us move the needle on our healing. So when we're talking about blind spots, I think I'd like to share an analogy to help. So if you were driving a car, right, every car has blind spots. Now, nowadays, we've got mirrors everywhere and cameras and all of that stuff. But in just like a regular car, there are blind spots, okay? And if you don't see the car in your blind spot, that doesn't mean that you're a bad driver. It just means that there are places that you cannot see from where you are sitting. I remember when my teenage son was learning how to drive, and we were for the first time on like a 4-lane road. So he was wanting to get over into the next lane, and there was a car in his blind spot. Now, from where he was, he couldn't see that car, and he put his blinker on and checked his mirrors and began to move into the lane, and the car honked. And so he was like, oh, and he kind of pulled back, and he realized that that was in his blind spot. And I explained to him, you always have to look over your shoulder or, double check before you change lanes, because there is such a thing as a blind spot. So if you're a driver, you understand this. Healing works exactly the same way. Your mind creates beliefs to help you survive. The programming that you have from the time you were born, right, is there for a reason, because your family, your society, the culture you live in, all of those things were impressed upon you. Your experiences changed your perceptions. It created belief systems for you. And these things help you make sense of your reality and help you survive. But the issue isn't that these things are there. The issue is that when we're out of an emotionally abusive relationship, or we are no longer in survival mode, sometimes those old beliefs are still driving. So today, I want to help you turn your head just enough to notice a few of those places that you may not have been able to see. This is how we make changes in our life. We have to be willing to look in a new direction, see things that weren't seen before. So let's talk about blind spot number 1. I'm going to go through different blind spots with you today. I have like 6 of them. And then I'm going to go through some other like beliefs that are common that you might resonate with. And then let's figure out some things for your own healing with that. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about my own blind spot. and then I'll give you some reflection questions so that you can put some of this stuff into practice. So blind spot number 1 is where most everyone starts. Most people are saying things or thinking things like, I just can't stop thinking about it. Or they're saying, I just need closure, or I need that last conversation, or I just need to explain myself to them, or I need them to explain. I need to know why. I just want them to admit what they did to me. So all of these things on the surface sound like problems, but really what they are, they're symptoms. So let me give you an example of this. One of my clients specifically came to me, hired me to help her in a one-on-one coaching container so that she could stop thinking about her ex, that she could quit ruminating. This was her number 1 priority. And she was saying, I replay all the conversations. I fight with my ex in my head. I can't stop. Like, it just takes up so much of my time. And when we start digging through this, like we've been together for several weeks unpacking this, we're finding things that are so much different than just the thinking, right? It's not just about these repetitive thoughts. It's ways that she was trying to protect herself by having these arguments in her mind with her ex, by repeating the conversations, right? Because really, at the core of it, what she wanted was to detach from this person. So when we were talking together, and she's thinking about it and it's driving her crazy and it's making her angry and she's feeling frustrated, I'm like, well, what do you really want? And the answer is, for most people, and for my client, specifically this one I'm referring to, detachment. She really wanted to detach. And by detachment, like obviously they weren't together, but this like emotional and mental detachment that she really was craving. But how can you detach from somebody mentally and emotionally if you keep thinking about them all the time, right? So the symptom is the ruminating. The symptom is the thing that keeps happening to you, but underneath of it, there's a deeper root that needs to be uncovered. For my client, she was ruminating like this, 1, out of habit, but 2, because it felt like if she could solve the problem in her mind, maybe she could solve it in reality. And for her specifically, there was this level of attachment that was still lingering, and this underlying belief that maybe they could still be together, or maybe he would change and then they could work it out, right? This wasn't a person who was abusive per se. This was just somebody who was non-committal. And that was painful for my client. So the more we talked about it and got into it, there was this really, really strong aversion to giving up all of the time and energy that she had put in the relationship prior to the breakup. And that was like, I use this analogy, you stay on the train long enough and then longer and then too long, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for a ticket to go home. And for many people, that is part of the issue. It's like, I've invested so much time, energy, emotion, resources, whatever. It feels like such a loss. So when my client, specifically in this situation, was ruminating and thinking and thinking and thinking and couldn't get the thoughts out of her head, it was holding her in that attachment. Even though consciously she'd say, I want to detach. Subconsciously, she really didn't, because that would mean she was going to have to come to terms with all of the stuff, the time, the energy, the emotional investment, that isn't going to result in anything if she truly does detach. So one thing I want to help you understand here is that your subconscious mind isn't ruminating or obsessively thinking or creating these thought loops on overtime because it wants to punish you or because it likes to suffer somehow. It's doing it because it is trying to keep you safe. It feels like it's doing something good for you. And when you realize this, and when you can take a moment and kind of step outside of yourself and look from an observational kind of standpoint, then what you can do is you can start the process of halting those ruminations. Because if you just allow them to keep going, it's like a tornado kind of, like if a tornado just keeps picking up energy, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like that. So obviously you can't really stop a tornado, but if you can stop what's going on in your mind with awareness and with intention. And when you say, I know this is happening to me, I need to stop and I need to pause and I need to think about what I'm thinking about and get it out of my brain, that's where you start the process of putting the brakes on for those types of ruminating spirals. So blind spot number 1 is, again, solving the wrong problem. You just think you have to force yourself to stop thinking about it. You just need to figure out why it happened. You need to have these conversations with this person, but that's not solving anything because that's not the real problem. Just like the example that I gave you of my client. That was not the real problem. All right, blind spot number 2. You're probably going to relate to this, and I'm going to say this very gently. If you are listening to this and you're nodding along like, yep, this is me, and you're ready to actually shift this and not just keep managing and coping, I invite you to schedule a free call from the link in the show notes. On that call, we're going to look at where you're at right now, where you want to be emotionally, and start uncovering what is actually in the way. And then I'm going to give you my recommendations and point you in the right direction if any of my programs might feel like a fit. And if it's aligned, we'll move forward. If not, you still leave with some clarity. All right, now let's get back to the episode. I thought I needed him to change. Now, for years, I believed that the biggest obstacle to my life was my ex-husband. That made perfect sense. He was the one that was the source of all of my anguish. Like when I would actually think about why I was in so much pain and suffering. If I got silent treatments, if I got criticism, if I was being talked down to, if he was rolling his eyes at me, criticizing me, making me confused, making me afraid, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. So I'm thinking, well, if he would just change, then my life would be better. But surprise, surprise, after leaving, nothing really was different. Aside from the fact that I wasn't experiencing those things, I still had all the leftover trauma that was inside my body and nervous system. So the hardest part, or the thing that I thought needed to change was him. It really wasn't. It was really me. It was really me learning to trust myself. Now, I want to be very careful about this because if someone is harming you and someone is abusing you, right? Like that is wrong. That should not be happening. You need to get to safety. You need to get out. Okay? But most of the work I do is helping people after they've left the emotionally abusive relationship, after they escaped their abuser. Okay? And it's the healing work that we are doing to take accountability for our own peace, for our own selves. Okay? So I couldn't change my husband when I was married to him. I couldn't make him be different. I had to get out. And then I had to work on my own healing. I had to learn to trust myself again. I had to learn to love myself again. I had to learn to not be triggered by things. So this was all a lot of hard work, a lot of practice that I put in. And I had to look back and say, wow, I really gave away a lot of my authority to this person. This isn't about blame. I need to be very clear about that. If someone else is hurting you, that's their fault. They hurt you. They did those things to you, right? However, the blind spot here is that the whole time I was thinking, and if I kept thinking this after I got out of my emotionally abusive relationship, oh, he needs to change, because there was post-separation abuse and everything happening. I was being dragged to court. I was having smear campaigns. Like, my kids were coming back and saying things to me that he had told them. So if I just kept holding on to this belief that, like, I need him to change or I need him to be different, then I would not be able to move forward in my own healing. Because the reality is, he's not going to change. I have to be the one to do the work so that he doesn't impact me, so that I can feel indifferent when he goes on being him. And so that's what I have done. Because even after I got out, right, I would still struggle. I would still doubt myself. I would wonder if I was overreacting about things. I would judge myself. I would even criticize myself. So the part that I need you to be really mindful of here is that, yes, if someone else is abusing you and hurting you, that's on them. They did that. That's not on you. That's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. It is on you to take ownership for how you feel and how you behave and how you move forward after that. So partly for me, I thought that the freedom was going to be in leaving, and the freedom was going to be in never having to deal with my ex again. And then if he would just change, right, I thought then I was going to be free. But eventually I learned and realized that freedom was just about me. It was about my choices, my behaviors, my beliefs, and trusting myself. Now let's talk about blind spot number 3. So I've worked with women who have told me that they want to be chosen. I just want someone to choose me. But then after we start asking better questions, we discover different things, right? You start out thinking, I just want to be chosen. I just want, him to see my value and to love me and to want me and to pick me, right? But this isn't just about wanting to be chosen or wanting to be put in the number one position. Sometimes we want somebody to sacrifice something for us, to choose us, right? Like, oh, for instance, if the person was, a workaholic and they just didn't have time for a relationship. And if they would just stop working so much and choose me, then I'll feel better and we can have a good relationship and we can ride off into the sunset and be happy. But right, because somewhere deep inside, you would be learning, if somebody gives up something for me, then I must be worth something. That my value comes from what this person is going to choose. Like they're giving up something else for me, so that somehow equates to my worth. But that is just not true, right? A lot of times women will have this feeling about if someone would choose them over another woman, choose them over an addiction, choose them over their own family or their own children or their own freedom, right? Like maybe they like to go out and hang out a lot, and then if they decide to stop doing that for you, then you feel worthy. So the blind spot here is thinking that you just want love and you just want to be chosen. But really, it's not about searching for love. It's searching for proof that you're worthy and that you have value. But again, this is where the deeper work comes in. Whether someone chooses you or not does not either decrease or increase your value. You are valuable exactly how you are. If someone isn't choosing you, that just means that they aren't valuing you. But if I give you a dollar bill and you accept it and you take it because you find value in that dollar bill, you saw value in that, so you want it. You would take it, right? if I give a dollar bill to a very wealthy person, they might laugh at me and be like, that's not really as valuable to me. Does it mean that that dollar bill doesn't have any value just because someone else doesn't take it? No, not at all. It still is worth 100 pennies. It is still a dollar, right? So the distinction here is disconnecting this idea that someone else's behaviors or choices or lack of sacrifices or whatever has anything to do with your worth. It doesn't. That's just the meaning that you've made it in your mind. Okay, blind spot number 4. So this has to do with being alone, and a lot of people struggle with this one. Many women aren't actually afraid of solitude, okay? They're afraid of what solitude means or what it is perceived as, right? So if I am alone, that might mean I'm unwanted, or I failed, or that I'm always going to be alone, or that nobody loves me, or nobody cares about me. So the relationship doesn't protect you from loneliness, right? You could be in a relationship and feel very, very lonely. I know I did for about 20 years. I was in a marriage and felt miserable and very lonely, right? So the relationship doesn't protect you from loneliness, right? You can be alone and feel very content, very at peace, very comfortable. I know I do that a lot. I love my alone time. I love solitude. Okay, so the relationship, if you're in a relationship, it's actually just protecting you from a belief like I'm unwanted, I'm a failure, there's something wrong with me if I don't have a partner, things like that, right? So a blind spot for a lot of people is that they don't really understand that being alone isn't really the issue. It's the meaning that you're giving it. What does it mean if someone is alone, right? So if I'm alone, do you think of me as, oh, well, she must be unwanted. Oh, she must be a failure. No one's ever going to love her. She's always going to be alone. No, you wouldn't say that about me, right? So why are you saying it about yourself? But this is the thing. It often goes much deeper than this. So if you're somebody who struggles with being alone, this could be a blind spot for you. This is something you need to look at and say, why am I afraid of this? Am I afraid of how other people will perceive me? Do I fear sitting with my emotions and my thoughts because I'm by myself and I really would like a distraction so I don't have to sit with it? So you see where I'm going with this? It's not always about what you think it is. Some people just say, I just don't like being alone. I'm just going to go out and hang out with my friends. I just can't stand the silence, right? It's not about that. It's about something else, and this could be a blind spot for you. Okay, blind spot number 5. So thinking everybody else is causing your emotions, right? Stop making me feel like that. Stop making me angry. Stop making me sad, right? Have you ever said that? I've got my hand up right now. I used to say this all the time. I used to believe that my ex-husband was in control of how I felt. I can remember specifically crying in tears when he would say, why are you being so emotional? I'm like, I can't help how I feel. But I didn't know back then that I could absolutely help how I felt. Now, rewind a little bit. When you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, it's like being in a war zone, okay? When bombs are flying and grenades and bullets zipping by, right? Like you're just trying to survive, okay? So I have to give this caveat here. Like if you're still in a relationship with somebody and it is still that chaos, then your emotional state is not going to be easy to regulate, okay? It's like trying to heal your hand when it's on a hot stove. It's just really not practical. But once you get out, right, like that's when you can start to tell yourself, wait a second, I'm in control of how I feel, not everyone else. I don't want everyone else in control of how I feel, because that means that I could really be completely up and down and sideways and all over the place emotionally. I don't want that. I want to be in control of it. And I'm sure you do too. So I used to believe that people would make me feel a certain kind of way, right? They made me feel unworthy or small or whatever that might be. But I see it differently now, because really what was happening was that people would behave in a certain way or say certain things or do certain things that I believed they should not be doing, or I believe they should be doing differently. So my belief system was in direct opposition to what I thought actually needed to be happening. And when that happens, reality disagrees with what you believe, you suffer. I've said this many, many times on many different episodes. Let me give you an example. So I have 2 adult children and 1 teen. And my teenager is the boy, and he loves to rage bait people. He loves to rage bait me. And it has taken me a very long time to realize what he was doing. So he would come and say things to me that was very nonchalant and would get a reaction out of me. And I would think he was serious, and I didn't know that he was doing it on purpose, because there's this thing called rage baiting where you say something and then you get somebody triggered and then you laugh because it's so funny how you got a reaction out of them, right? So this happened multiple times, and my daughters would be like, Mom, he's just rage baiting you, and then he would start laughing, and then we'd all start laughing. But it took me a really long time to start to figure out his pattern. I'm like, is he being serious or is he not? Okay. So if every single time he said something to me, I would get emotionally triggered by that, then who is in control of my feelings? He would be. He would actually be the one controlling how I feel. But the reality is, you're always in control of how you feel. Always. Okay? If he says something and then I'm like, oh, this is one of those times, I can go into myself and ask myself, what am I thinking about that's causing me to get triggered by him? And more often than not, it would be something like, he shouldn't say that. He shouldn't believe that. He should not have that crazy kind of idea. He shouldn't think that way, right? So in my mind, that was what was creating that. It was not what he said and what he did. It was the beliefs that I had that directly opposed what I believed should be happening. Now, that's a silly example, and if you have kids, you can relate to it. But a serious example would be if your ex and his family are going around town spreading lies about you, going on a smear campaign, telling people things that never happened, trying to make you look like the villain and your ex the victim. This has probably happened to most or many of you who are listening to this podcast, and it's happened to me too. But if every time they go around your town, your neighborhood, social media, talking bad about you, saying bad things about you, that you get upset, then they're in control of how you feel. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with my ex and his family controlling how I feel. Because the reality is, I can't make them stop doing it. Now, we're talking about normal, average people just gossiping and talking bad about others. This is not where we're talking about like famous people using slander or libel or making false claims that can actually be sued for, like things like that. We're just talking about the gossip train and the smear campaigns where the flying monkeys are just chitter-chattering and talking bad about you. It gets back to you, you hear about it, and then you get triggered, right? We can't make people stop doing those things. That's what they do. They're doing it for their own satisfaction, their own ego, whatever it is, right? So you have a choice. You always have a choice. You can go to them and talk to them and try to convince them to stop lying about you. That's probably just going to fill their bucket anyway. You could ignore it and sit and cry and be frustrated or angry about it. Or you could process what's actually happening so you could take your peace back. That's an option too. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. I'm never going to judge you. I'm never going to tell you you should or shouldn't do anything. But I would want to know why you want to choose. Why do you want to choose one of these three options? What is your reason for wanting to approach them and talk to them and try to convince them? What is the reason? And if you say like, well, they need to know what they're doing, or they should shut their mouths, or they shouldn't be so inconsiderate or rude. Well, you just told me all your beliefs. There they are, right? If you want to get to the root of your blind spots, you have to ask yourself more questions. So just as a recap on blind spot 5, other people are not in control of how you feel. You are in control of how you feel based on what? Your subconscious beliefs. When you know what you believe on a subconscious level, then you can start to challenge that and bring peace back into your life. All right, blind spot number 6 is thinking that healing means that you have to become a different person. Yes, this is a blind spot because this is a cousin to perfectionism, right? I know that I'll be healed when I'm never getting emotional anymore when I talk about it. Or I'll know that I'm healed if I just don't get triggered just by random things. Or if I don't think about them anymore. Or if I don't have nightmares about them anymore. Right? Because what's happening is you have tied this idea of healing to something, right? I'm only healed when these factors occur. Okay, maybe I'll be healed when I don't care what anybody else thinks of me. Or maybe I'll be healed when I'm confident every day, right? And those are elements of healing, okay? But healing is a journey. It's not just some finish line that we reach. It's progress. It's when you are making changes little by little and you're practicing it every single day. That's why I have a 16-week program, because people come to me and they want instant healing. I'm like, it's just not happening. It's not. Can we make it faster, more productive, instead of just talking about it day after day after day? Yes, 100%. Right? I feel like it's very hard to heal when you just keep talking about your problems all the time, because basically what you're doing is reinforcing the negativity in your mind, and that's what keeps you stuck. So if you have beliefs like, I'm not going to heal unless, I guess I shouldn't say it that way. I will know that I'm healed when I'm not getting triggered, I'm not crying, I'm not emotional, I don't think about it anymore, right? That's not real. Because real healing isn't that you're somebody who doesn't ever have humanity, right? Humanity, you are human. You're going to cry. You're going to get upset. You're going to have emotions. The goal isn't to never feel anything, ever. We need to feel. Our emotions give us information. It helps us, okay? So healing isn't about being somebody who just never has any wounding or doesn't remember or can erase the past, right? Healing is about being somebody who understands the wounds and how to process them and work through them, so that you can be at peace. All right, now I'm going to share a story with you about my own personal blind spot, because after I got out of my emotionally abusive marriage, a huge turning point for me was when I was listening to a podcast on healing, just like you are today, and I realized the power of my own mind on that podcast. That podcast is the reason that I am here today. It is the reason I have 3 books. It is the reason I am a coach. It is the reason that this podcast exists. Okay? That podcast is no longer available. However, this one is, so that's good. But My point is, up until then, a lot of my focus was on understanding what happened to me. I was deep in understanding narcissism. I was deep in understanding emotional abuse. I was reading books that were, about the psychology of disordered, like personality disorders. And the blind spot for me, right, was about me trying to solve my healing with more information, that I was trying to understand something better. And so that became a blind spot for me. And for many, many people, it also is. They stay in this phase for a very long time. They want to learn all the things. They want to read all the books, take all the courses, like understand why narcissists do this and why they do that, right? And that's not actually, the focus is put on them. It's not on you. And that's where my blind spot was. I wasn't focusing on me. Even when I went to therapy for years, we were dissecting my ex's behavior and we were trying to figure out why I would have allowed him to abuse me that way, right? That wasn't changing anything for me. Yeah, it was interesting. I was getting insight from it and information, but it didn't transform me. The deeper transformation for me was when I realized that my subconscious beliefs were the thing running the show. That's why I would still get triggered. That's why I would still break down. That's why I would get upset or why I would be defensive, right? For me, that was my blind spot. And some people may have that as well. I actually see a lot of people get stuck in that phase, and it's a hard phase to get out of, because ultimately the reality is we don't do things just because we're ignorant or we don't know. Sometimes we do. But oftentimes we get stuck there, like in my particular situation with this blind spot here, because I didn't have to look at myself. That was a scarier thing to do, right? I didn't have to look at me. I could just look at him and look at why he was the way he was and his disorder and his personality issues and, his abusive nature, right? So I just thought if I understood emotional abuse well enough, then maybe I would heal, right? I read, I learned, I analyzed, I dissected. And all that did help in a way, but it wasn't enough, because my blind spot was believing that knowing that stuff was going to create change. But it wasn't until I actually started changing the subconscious beliefs that I was carrying around that my life actually changed. All right, so if you have a pen and paper, if you're not driving or on a walk and you're in a safe place, I'd love to give you some questions to think about. You can just pause and think about it if you're walking, or you can just come back to this later or journal them out if you'd like. What problem have you been trying to solve for years? And usually we're thinking about like emotional problems. What if that isn't the real problem? And what belief would have to exist for you for this struggle to actually make sense? What have you accepted as true when it comes to this that you've never actually questioned? And if someone watched your life, what belief would they say that you have? I'll put these down in the bottom of the show notes so that you can read them also if you'd like to. But I hope today's episode doesn't leave you wondering what your blind spots are. Really, I hope it leaves you with more curiosity, because it's important to know that healing isn't always about just like looking for what's wrong with you. It's about uncovering the beliefs that made sense while you were trying to survive, and even after that, when you were trying to heal. And sometimes the best breakthroughs aren't about learning something new or having new information. It's just finally getting your own clarity and seeing something that's been there all along. All right, so just a quick recap on the blind spots is you're probably solving the wrong problem. that you think you need someone else to change or admit the truth or apologize, that you think you wanted love or to be chosen, that you're afraid of being alone, that you think other people were in control of your emotions, and that healing means that you're never going to get triggered again, or you're never going to have a reaction or emotions. And then mine that I added, the blind spot for me, was that thinking the more I knew about narcissism and the more I knew about emotional abuse and the signs and the symptoms was going to help me heal. But it actually did not. It just kept me stuck. So that was my blind spot there. So I just want to thank you for spending time with me today, because I know there are lots of podcasts that you could be listening to, and it just means so much to me that you've chosen to be here today. If you love this podcast and it helps you, please share it with others. Leave me a review if you could, because that really helps get the word out. And if today's episode has helped you see even one of your blind spots a little clearer, I hope you'll give yourself some grace and be like, oh, wow, right? Like, it's good that you know, right? Because if we can know where that blind spot is now, we can stay safe. We can protect ourselves, just like driving in that car, right? Blind spots don't mean there's something wrong. It just means that the places where your mind has been trying to protect you haven't been visible. And that's okay. We can bring them into awareness. That's why I'm here. That's why I do this every single week. Once you see them, then you can start to change them. So until next time, remember, healing isn't about becoming somebody new. It's about uncovering the parts of yourself that have been there all along. They're just waiting to emerge so that you can be the best version of yourself. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk to you next week.